In creation, we see, again, if we're looking at this from God's point of view, or if we're even looking at it from a human point of view with an openness to the possibility that there could be a God, I think we just are overwhelmed with the reality that not only did God create the world that we live in, but God sustains and directs the world that we live in. We call this idea, and sometimes you may have heard this, it's one of those, have you ever known how like churchy people sometimes use these churchy words, and I don't really know what they mean, but it sounds good, and so I'll say it or whatever, but one of those churchy words is this word called providence. And sometimes you'll see that written with a capital P. And providence, though, actually is just this idea that creation isn't something that God just sort of created and then kind of walked away from, what it's sometimes called the clockmaker God. He kind of made this clock, he wound it up, and then he walked off until it ran out needed to be wound back up again. But rather, a God not only creates everything, but sustains everything in being. Really, in a way, is saying that every moment is a moment of creation. God continuing to desire and to will everything that is to be. Because actually, if God didn't want it to be, it wouldn't be anymore. And that's an amazing thing, again, to think about how particular God's love is. It really gets down to the details. God wants everything that is to be. God wants, for example, you to be. He called you out of nothingness into being, and he continues to hold you in being, even when we turn away from him. And so that's what providence is. That's this idea of providence. And that implies to us that there is some rhyme or reason, again, to our lives, that there is some direction to it. St. Paul says about that all is for good for those who love God. Not just some things, not just the things we like, not just the things that make sense to us, but all is for good. And again, that's an understanding of God's providence. It's very interesting that God allows us to have a role to play in that. We have free will. There are certain things in this world that God chooses to allow to be done by us. Now, that's not to mean that God is somehow, his hands are tied by us, but that he has such great confidence in us, he allows us to participate. And we see this over and over and over again in the history of salvation, that God chooses, he prefers to act in the world through human instruments. And again, that's going to come to its perfection in Jesus Christ becoming a man and saving us in his sacred humanity as a man. That God has this great confidence in it. It reminds me of a silly commercial I saw one time as a kid. There was this stuff called shake and bake. It's a kind of a way of like sort of making sort of fake fried chicken. You shake this coating on this chicken, you actually bake it, but then it's supposed to make people think it's fried chicken. I guess it's maybe better for you or something, I don't know. So anyhow, but in this commercial, this mom and the little children have made the shake, and the dad comes home and he bites into the shake and bake chicken and he goes, "Oh honey, this sure is good," or whatever, and the little girls go, "It's shake and bake and we helped." And I always kind of think that's a way, again, of seeing God's providence in action for us, that God lets us help. It's a strange thing that even though he really is in control of the whole thing, and it's not going to get out of control, he leaves room for us. He leaves room for us to act. It leaves room for us to act for the good, in being a part of providence. He also, though, of course, leaves room for us. We can abuse our freedom, and rather than using it for the good, which we've been given that freedom, we can also use it for ill and misuse our freedom and sin and depart from God and cause disruption and creation. It's one of those things. Sometimes people have a hard time believing in God because they see that there's evil in the world. And they say, how can a good God, a loving God, an all-powerful God, let things like this happen? It just doesn't make sense. Well, actually, if you look at a lot of the things that people talk about that way, they're not things that God has done at all, actually. Like the person who was, hit and killed by a drunk driver. Sometimes people, they'll get, God, why? But God didn't kill that person. That drunk driver abusing their freedom that God had given them, using it to choose for evil rather than for good, was really the source of that sorrow and that evil, coming into the world. But even what we might call sort of natural evils that exist in the world, natural disasters or this or that come along, God allows those, but He always provides in His providence the ability somehow for good to come out of those things. He also does even in those moral evils that we as human actors choose to bring about. He figures out a way that good can come from the and we see that again and again and again. The triumph of the human spirit, aided by grace, to bring bring good out of the worst of situations. I'm reminded of the story of Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, or Saint Edith Stein, as her name was before she became a Carmelite nun, who was a convert from Judaism, was caught up in the death camps of the Second World War, and she was on a train that was taking her to one of these concentration camps with a whole bunch of other women and children. She was a Carmelite nun. And on this train, just pandemonium was reigning. Children were running around screaming, crying. Women were just sort of sitting there, in shock and horror and just, overwhelmed with the fear and anxiety and, just total despair of this situation. And people who were on that train with her said that she went around to some of these women and would say, encouraging, say, where are your children? Let's find them and let's maybe tell them a story, or try to restore hope and love. They said she was like an angel of light walking around in the midst of this darkness. Well, how did she do that? Well, see, she was willing to allow God's providence to bring good, even in this horrible evil that she was caught up in. And she had no illusions that this story was going to have a happy ending, and it didn't. As soon as she arrived at that concentration camp, she was one of the first taken to be executed. And yet, the triumph of God's providence, if we can trust in God's will, even in the face of moral evil. And so we see God not only as creator, but God as sustainer. God as the provident, the one who guides and directs and gives what we need. And that's God's creation of this visible world. Also, God, though, created things that we cannot see as well. The creation of spiritual beings as well. We know that God, for example, we know that heaven is a reality. In the Lord's Prayer we say, "Our Father who art in heaven." Well, where is heaven? Well, that's a good question. Heaven seems to be not. It seems to be not the location where we find God, but the place where God is. That is heaven. To be united with God is to be in heaven. That's what we were made for. And so heaven was created as well. This where we will be with God, where God is now. Also, we know that there is a hell, the place where those who have separated themselves from God, have chosen to separate themselves from God, remain eternally in separation from God, which is a state of eternal torment. And hell really exists. Also, though, God created other beings, actually literally persons, not human persons, but but angelic persons, the angels. God created the angels. And I just encourage you to try to get to know the angels a little better. They are so fascinating. Of the spiritual creation, the angels are really wonderful. I encourage you to get to know about angels more. St. Thomas Aquinas is a great source to find out more about the angels. Angels really, frankly, I think we trivialize them a lot of times. We sort of think of them in these funny pictures that sometimes they're depicted in art. And really angels are really very unlike us, not just in the fact that they don't have bodies, but in a lot of the things that implies, that they are in a certain sense practically, limitless. They are incredibly wise, incredibly strong, and totally good. Totally good. And so they are beautiful and good and strong and wise. And actually, you have one of these angels that God has entrusted you to. That's called your guardian angel. And so I encourage you to get to know this guardian, to rely on them, especially for spiritual help. The angels being spiritual beings, that's sort of their area of expertise. To ask them to help you to grow in virtue, to be able to avoid temptations, to be able to understand better the truths of the faith. All of these things are things that your guardian angel can help you with. And so I encourage you to become acquainted with the angels. Of course, also there are the fallen angels, those who chose to disobey God from the first moment of their existence, the demonic spirits who are fallen angels. And they are all those things I said about the angels, except rather than being completely good, they are completely evil and bent on our destruction. And so we really want to completely avoid them. And they're really real and they're really there. So we need to be aware of that as well. Well, we've taken a very quick romp through creation. I wish I could spend all day talking to you more about the angels. I really do love that. But we need to move on. And in our next lesson, we'll look at the creation of man. And this, which in the story of creation and revelation that we have from God, seems to be the point to which that revelation of God's creation seems to be leading to. So we'll take up the creation of man next time. Thank you.